H. Holmes is one of the first known serial killers in the U.S. If you don't recognize his name, then you might recognize the name Herman Webster Mudgett. Holmes is a serial killer who would kill and torture and collect for insurance money, with 27 plus victims between 1886 and 1894, with his victimology including men, women, and children. Unlike most serial killers, he doesn't have one methodology. His crimes occurred in Indiana, Pennsylvania, Illinois, and the U.S.-Canadian border. And on May 7, 1896, he was executed by hanging at the Moyamensing Prison in Philadelphia. Welcome back to the TCL podcast. Here we talk murder and other forms of crime. I do have a YouTube channel that you can go check out. I also have a Patreon that you can enjoy. You don't have to, but by joining, you'll receive early access to episodes like this that are scheduled to come out. I also have a Patreon. I also have a merch shop that you can go and check out as well. For any updates on my channel or podcast, you can find me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Now, let's dive into today's episode here on the TCL podcast. I do want to say one thing. Happy New Year. This is the last pre-recorded episode of 2023. And the last episode in our mini-series where I'm combining history and true crime. But I am also getting over a cold, so please bear with me, guys. I promise you. I got a cold on Christmas, then got laryngitis, and then I just have a runny nose and cough that I cannot seem to shake. I'm so sick of coughing, y'all. I really am. But Holmes trapped, tortured, and murdered possibly hundreds of guests at his Chicago hotel, which he opened for the 1893 World's Fair. Alabama held this present one, but the only reason I know about the World's Fair is because of this guy right here. Notorious for his times, the case received widespread publicity. It wasn't until 2003 that this case regained interest. Although Holmes is sometimes referred to as America's first serial killer, his crimes occurred after others such as Thomas Neal Cream, the Austin axe murderer, and the Bloody Benders. Sorry, guys. Holmes was born in Gilman, New Hampshire. He was the son of Levi Horton Mudgett and Thea Page Price, and the family was descended from among the first settlers to the area. He grew up with a father who was a very strict guy, who also really disciplined him. He would claim that as a child he would be forced by other students to view and touch the human skeleton as they found out about his fear of local doctor offices. The bullies had initially brought him one to scare him, but instead he was utterly fascinated. I mean, that could be like either a psychopath thing, or maybe he just wanted to be a doctor. Well, he graduated from the University of Michigan Medical School in 1884. And y'all, speaking of Michigan, I really want them to win the playoffs. And by the time this video comes out, that might come back and bite me in the butt. So, let's pray they beat Alabama. So while he was enrolled there, he stole bodies from the school laboratory, disfiguring the corpse and claiming that the people had been accidentally killed. He collected insurance money from policies which he had taken out on each one. After graduating, he moved to Chicago to practice pharmacy, and he began to engage in a number of shady business transactions, real estate, and promotional deals under the name H. Holmes. So, On July 8, 1878, he would marry Clara A. Lovering in Alton, New Hampshire. And on January 28, 1887, he would marry Myra Z. Belknap in Minneapolis. He was still married to Lovering at the time, making him a bigamist. He and Belknap had a daughter named Lucy Theodate Holmes, who was born July 4th, 1889 in Englewood, Illinois. The family of three resided in the upscale Chicago suburb of Wilmette. Although Holmes spent a lot of his time in the city tending to his business, he filed a petition of divorce from his first wife after marrying his second. But the divorce was never finalized, and he married his third wife, Georgiana Yoke. He just loves bigamy, doesn't he? On January 9th, 1894. And he had a relationship with Julia Smith, the wife of Ned Connor, a one-time employee of his who later fled to Chicago, and Julia became one of Holmes' victims. So, while he was in Chicago, he came across Dr. E.S. Holton's drugstore. It was located in the corner of Wallace and 63rd Street. Holton was suffering from cancer, and while his wife minded the store, through his charm, Holmes got a job there and then manipulated him into letting him purchase the whole store. The agreement that she could live in the upstairs apartment even after Holton died. Once Holton died, he murdered Mrs. Holton and told people that she was visiting relatives in California. As people started to appreciate asking questions to when she was coming back, he elaborated a lie and said that she loved it so much that she decided to live there. He would purchase a lot across from the drugstore where he built a 3-story block-long castle, as it was dubbed by the neighbors, and it opened up as a hotel for the World Columbian Exposition in 1893, with part of the structure of a commercial place. The ground floor contained, aside from his relocated drugstore, various shops, while the upper 2 floors contained a personal office and as well as a maze of over 100 windowless rooms with doorways that would open to brick walls. Interesting. And a host of strange labyrinth constructions. Holmes had repeatedly changed builders during the initial construction in the castle to ensure that he only fully understood the design of the house that he had created, therefore decreasing the chance of any of them reporting it to the police. Over a period of 3 years, Holmes selected female victims from among his employees. And of course he would take life insurance policies out on them, making him the beneficiary, lovers and guests, and would torture them and kill them. Some of them were locked in soundproof bedrooms fitted with gas lines that permitted him to asphyxiate them at any time. Some victims were locked in a huge bank vault near his office, and he could sit and listen to them scream, panic, and suffocate. Sociopath. So, the victim's body went by a secret chute to the basement, in which they were meticulously dissected, stripped of flesh, crafted into skeleton models, and then sold to medical schools. Holmes then cremated some of the bodies and placed them in lime pits for destruction. He also got 2 giant furnaces, as well as 2 pits of acid body of various poisonous. And through his connections, he gained a medical school, and he was able to sell the skeleton's organs. He also picked one of the most remote rooms in the castle to perform hundreds of illegal abortions. Some of his patients died as a result of these procedures, and the cores were processed as and the skeletons sold. Sorry, guys. If you got any recommendations how to get rid of this cough, I would love to hear it. But following the World's Fair, the creditors closing in on the economy in a general slump, he left Chicago and then appeared in Fort Worth, Texas. And he inherited property from two rail lines heir sisters. One of them he had promised marriage to, and both whom he murdered. Though he sought to construct another castle along the lines of his Chicago operation, he soon abandoned the project, finding the law enforcement climate in Texas inhospitable. He continued to move around the U.S. and Canada, while it seemed likely he could continue to kill his own bodies and would date. In July 1894, he was arrested and briefly incarcerated for the time for a horse swindle that ended up in St. Louis. He was bailed out, but while in jail, he struck a conversation with a convicted train robber named Marion Hedgepeth, who was serving 25-year sentence, and he concocted a plan to bilk insurance out of $20,000 by taking a policy out on him, then faking his death. Holmes promised Hedgepeth a $500 commission in exchange for the name of his lawyer who could be trusted. He was directed to Colonel Jephthah Howe, the brother of the public defender, and Howe found Holmes' plan to be brilliant and would fake his death. The insurance company became suspicious and refused to pay. He did not press his claim. Instead, he concocted a similar plan with his associate Piesler, and he had agreed to fake his own death that his wife would collect a $10,000 policy, in which he would split it with Holmes and the shady attorney Howe. This scheme, which would take place in Philadelphia, should set him up as an inventor under the name B.F. Perry, and then be killed. And then Holmes would kill him, although some have argued that an alcoholic and chronic depressive might have committed suicide. Forensic evidence would present at his trial, Holmes' trial later, saying that he showed chloroform was administered after his death and presumably a fake suicide. He proceeded to collect on the policy on the basis of the genuine horse. He then went on to manipulate him and his wife into allowing 3 of the 5 children, Alice, Nellie, and Howard, to stay in his custody. The eldest of his daughters, Baby, remained with him as he traveled with the children in northern U.S. and into Canada. Simultaneously, he escorted his Piesel's wife along the parallel route, and while using other various aliases and lying to her concerning her husband's death, as well as lying about her whereabouts to other citizens, other children, they were often only separated by a few blocks. So, a Philadelphia detective had tracked Holmes, finding his decomposed bodies of the 2 girls in Toronto, and followed him to Indianapolis. There he went to the cottage. He reported to have visited a local pharmacy and the drugs he used to kill him. After the custodian of the castle informed the police he was never allowed to clean up the floors, the police began to investigate, and a fire of mysterious origin consumed the building on August 9, 1895, and the site is currently occupied by the U.S. Post Office building. Also, the Chicago Hotel, can anybody tell me what it's known for today? What's there today? So, the number of its victims have typically been estimated between 20 and 100, even though as high as 230. Based on the missing persons report, at the time of his testimony, the neighbors who had reported seeing the unidentified young woman into his hotel, a young woman with whom they never saw exit. The discrepancy in numbers can be perhaps attributed to the fact that people came to Chicago to see the World's Fair, but for one reason or another never returned home. There is only 27 verified numbers. His victims were primarily women, primarily blonde, but included some children and men. So, his trial and execution. While he was in prison in Philadelphia, not only did the Chicago police investigate his operations in the city, but the Philadelphia police began to unravel the whole situation. In particular, what happened to the missing children. Philadelphia Detective Frank Gayer was given the task, and his quest for the children, like the Holmes castle, was received publicity. Holmes was then put on trial for the murder of Piesel and confessed the following conviction: the 27 murders in Chicago, Indianapolis, and Toronto, and 6 attempted murders. He was paid $7,500 by the Hearst papers in exchange for his confession. And he would give very contradictory accounts of his life, initially claiming innocence and later he was possessed by Satan. Yeah, I know. On New Year's Eve, 1910, Marion Hedgepath, who had been pardoned for informing on Holmes, was shot and killed by police officers during a holdup in a Chicago saloon. Then, March 7, 1914, the story of the Chicago Tribune reported the death in a former caretaker. Most serial killers are psychopaths, and they tend to share key characteristics. They're manipulative, cold, and they lack what might have been called a moral compass. They also know right from wrong, but are not invested in the distinction. There is only one concern with the wrong behavior. They're not subject to anxiety. So, there is a curse of H.H. Holmes. Just before Halloween, 1895, the trial lasted 6 days, and it was the trial of the century. But he had appealed his case, and he even affirmed the verdict. Alright guys, that's it for today's episode. I hope y'all have a happy new year, and I hope Michigan wins. Like I said, that's probably going to bite me. But if you're an Alabama fan, I don't care. I grew up in Alabama my whole life, born and raised, but I am an Auburn fan. But I will see y'all next time. Y'all have a happy new year and a great day.